12th, 3:30 agenda session to order. Can I have approval on the minutes?
Second.
Okay, minutes stand without objection. Council, if you would take a look at your agenda for this evening. We have final ordinances on the final reading. One for Public Works for District 8. We have ordinances on the first reading, which will be covered in Planning Committee. Resolution, Councilman Henderson.
We have something tonight that, as far as I know, it's the first that we've ever had, and that's before our order of business actually starts. We have a form-based code appeals hearing tonight.
Right, yes.
And I would like to confirm the process of that hearing. Is it correct that it'll be handled just like a zoning case where, and in this case, who we typically refer to as the applicant, would that be the Wingfields?
Yeah.
And so the opposition would be anybody that would be in opposition to, I guess, what the Form-Based Code Committee approved.
That's correct.
Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, so it'd be 7 minutes for the applicant, which would be the Wingfields, 9 minutes for anyone in opposition.
Okay.
And then 2 minutes for the applicant to rebuttal. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
The opposition could be anybody in the public.
That's right.
Now, forget the people that are in opposition,
Mills River Company?
Mill River.
Company, yeah.
Since they're the one that filed the appeal, would they have the right to go first in opposition, or how is that part going to work?
If they filed it, yes, they would have the right to go first in opposition.
And then any time left would be reserved for anybody in the public, I guess, that would
Yes, sir.
oppose that. Okay.
For 9 minutes.
Nine, yeah,
Yes,
thank you. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. All right. All right, ordinances under, final reading. First reading, they'll be covered in planning and zoning. Any questions about resolutions? Councilman Ledford.
Chair, under item F, I believe, if I have this correctly, I've had a few meetings with HR staff working over sections, specifically 1.4, and I think Julie was going to address it, not to send you away, Jermaine. Always like to see you, but I want to go to your boss there.
Thank you, Councilman. We're asking for one more week deferral on this. We have had some continued conversation on the items here, but there's one in particular in 1.4 around policies for accredited departments and making sure, we just want to make sure that we get that language right so that our HR department is aware of any of those policies that are being added or changed in those departments and that we're working well together. But Councilman Ledford and I had a meeting on that today, and I think we have come to a good resolution on that, but just want to give us one more week to make sure that language is exactly right.
All right.
Great, thank you. And Julia, thank you for, and Daniel, where are you? I don't know, I saw him a minute ago. There you are. Daniel, thank you for our meeting as well. I think we're all in sync with the right hand knowing what the left hand is doing, and I think that's a better way to govern when we're all aware of what's going on. So I appreciate the information and collaboration. So
Yeah, we'll have all of those changes to you before the end of this week, so you have time to review for next week.
great. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Ledford will
1 week deferral, Julia?
Yes.
1 week, thank you.
be 1 week deferral to September 19th for that item. All right, council, any other questions, resolutions? Economic development, we covered human resources, police, public works. Any questions on next week's proposed agenda items? All right, we got Councilman Henderson, followed by Madam Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under the Mayor's office, creation of this advisory commission.
All right.
It's going to be next week before we actually have a Parks and Public Works committee. And I would like a presentation on this first before I have to vote on it on the same day. And I guess my question is since this is on the proposed 2-week agenda, if we could hear it in committee next week and have it placed on the agenda for the 26th. That way we're not having to vote on it on the same day we have it in committee. That way if we have further questions about it, we can follow up and have a week to.
All right, that works with me, Councilman Henderson. So we'll hear this in the Parks and Public Works Committee next week, and then this will be on the September 26th agenda.
All right, and there he is. I'm sure we'll have a full presentation on as far as what it'll consist of, thoughts behind it.
Yes, we can absolutely put that together. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Vice Chair Hill.
I actually had similar questions to Councilman Henderson, so that's all.
Well, thank you. All right, under reading, any questions about Public Works? I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong one. I apologize. Next, any other questions about next week's proposed agenda? Right? Any purchasing questions? We have 14 purchases today. So any questions? All right. Future considerations, if you would take a look at that. The items that you have questions about. Please hit your light. We don't have any departmental reports today. We do have two committees, Affordable Housing Committee and Planning and Zoning Committee today. Following those meetings, if time allows, we will have an attorney-client meeting after this one. So if there are no other questions, I will turn it over to Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I call to order the Affordable Housing Committee. Can I get a motion on the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. Council, today we have the privilege of getting a presentation on the market value analysis, which is really the final large piece of the puzzle or our three-legged stool. Jermaine used that three-legged stool example with me recently, of the different pieces that we need for our long-term strategy to address housing affordability in the city of Chattanooga. So I'd like to welcome our Chief Housing Officer, Nicole, up to the podium. And Nicole, if you want to fill us in on how we're going to proceed this afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for welcoming me here today. Thank you again for the privilege of presenting. We were in front of you in May with the Reinvestment Fund, who gave you a preview of the market value analysis and preliminary findings. They have concluded their analysis and are here today to present to you the final findings of the market value analysis. It's an abbreviated presentation. I'll be handing out the full presentation for you, and then the final presentation we will also post online so that you'll have access to it, as will the public. It is compelling, and I am very grateful for the work that went into this. We now know the number of units that we need today and in the future. We now have the housing action plan that's going to give us the policies and tools to address those needs. And with today's presentation, the market value analysis, we'll understand where we need to make our investments and why. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Ira Goldstein of the Reinvestment Fund, who will present. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible, I guess? Sure. Well, it's my pleasure and honor to be here today, both on behalf of our organization, Reinvestment Fund, and my teammate, Jessica Guarneros, and our partner in this work, Karen Black. What I'm going to show you today is the completion of this market value analysis, and hopefully stimulate some ideas for you about how to think about its utility going forwards. So just as a quick reminder, the market value analysis is a 20-plus-year-old tool that we created in Philadelphia, the purpose of which is to help understand the characteristics of a real estate market so that the interventions and investments and programs and the deployment of all those things can be done into the places where they have the greatest prospects of having not only the direct impact of what you're trying to achieve, but also a more contagion effect of positivity around them. These are the assumptions upon which this analysis is based, but I'd like to focus in on just one of these bullet points, And that is, you are going to see a mapping of the city of Chattanooga that takes all of the little puzzle pieces of the city and puts them into a set of market-based categories. The purpose of that in creating those categories is to identify what the characteristics of the market are. It is not to say invest in these places and avoid these places. Our philosophy in creating it the way we do is predicated on the notion of building from strength. So while you'll see a characterization of all the markets of the city of Chattanooga, the idea is to think about those investments and these programs and other kinds of things that you're doing with an eye towards, let's figure out where there are strengths that we can invest into, again, so that the impact can sort of spread out. Oftentimes, a note of strength could be one of your sort of extraordinary natural resources like river views or mountain views or things of that nature. It could be a jobs cluster. It could be a confluence of public transportation. But also it could be an adjacent strong real estate market. And because we do this analysis at a very small geography, those adjacencies can be thought of as those nodes of strength upon which to build. So there are other sort of pieces of how we do, why we do, what we do in this analysis, but I wanted to make sure that we emphasize that one in particular. So what we're going to do now, and really in short order, and I'm happy to answer follow-up questions as we sort of go through, but I want to give you a flavor of what the market value analysis is, and then give you a little bit of the connections that we observe between the characteristics of the real estate market as well as the demographics of the people that live within those markets, the degree to which the Chattanooga market is affordable to different price range residents, as well as where we identify that there are risks of economic displacement based on the trends in the real estate market. So with that, this is a map of the city of Chattanooga. Those little black trails are all the places that we went in validating the data and the analysis. And so you will see that there are very few places of the city that have any number of housing units or residents that we did not touch. And this is critical in terms of identifying whether or not the underlying data are accurate and whether or not the model that we create from that data ends up being accurate. We use a series of market indicators, and these are the same kinds of indicators that perhaps an investor might use, and that's how we came up with the set of ingredients to this analysis. But it's things like what are homes selling for? What about the variability in those prices? Where do we see evidence of new construction and renovation permitting? Also, where are the stressors? Things like vacancy, foreclosure, inability to pay utility bills, utility shutoffs, and then some characteristics of the housing stock, like its density, where that subsidized rental housing is, and the owner occupancy. And it's all of those pieces together for all the little puzzle pieces of Chattanooga that allow us to develop the analysis that we do. This will be showed you in a map in a second, but you will see in this a table that has letters in the rows and then variables along the columns. Each of the columns are the different indicators of the market. Each of the rows are the different markets, and you will see a mapping where you'll see purple and blue and yellow and orange and the like around the city of Chattanooga. The characteristics that you see in the cells, the intersection of those rows and columns, are the typical block group within that category. So these markets are set up so that there's as much separation between those markets and as much commonality within them. So if you see purple anywhere in the city of Chattanooga, the purples are more or less the same as markets go. But when you see a blue, you know that that's different from purple. Just to highlight a few differences, for example, your A and B markets, those are your two very strongest real estate markets in the city of Chattanooga. They largely differ in that one is very much a homeownership market and one is very much a renter-occupied market. Both very strong real estate markets. If you make your way through the middle markets, the C's, the D's, the E's, you will see there are different price points, there are different tenure structures, there's different levels of investment and vacancy and the like. So the idea is to create these strata, again, so that they are as similar within and as different across. And this is that mapping. I'd like to draw your attention to a couple things on this map. Firstly, again, wherever you see purple or blue, all purples will look very much the same from a market perspective. but they will look different than blue, different from yellow, et cetera. You will see along the ridge a series of block groups that have very thin black outlines, and that's predominantly where they are. When we validated, what we observed is, and these were along the ridges, and you all probably know this way better, it took us a couple months to learn this, the top of those ridges look very different than as you make your way down those hills. And so what we did is we physically split the geographies that the census gives us to use for this analysis so that you can actually see with even finer resolution what those real estate markets look like. In some instances, we split those markets in two. In some instances, we split them in three, and sometimes you find literally three different things going on in a very small area. So draw your attention to that. Also draw your attention to this. I'd mentioned that logic of building from strength. And I said that sometimes strength is an adjacent real estate market that is stronger than the market that you're looking at. Look for places, for example, where you have blues next to yellow or purples next to orange. Those are places where investments to sort of draw the strength across those boundaries can have more of a contagion effect on the areas around it. And that is that logic of building from strength. Of course, there's other strengths that you would look at: a strong school, park system, library, community-based association, other kinds of things, but certainly those adjacencies are going to be important for you. Here, what we wanted to do is to respect your geographies as council members and show you where those geographies are. And one of the things that's really interesting and is not uncommon in cities that we work is city council boundaries. First of all, they tend to be a little bit unusual, let's say, in every city that you work. In virtually every city council district across the city, you'll have 3 or 4 or 5 different market types. It's the very extreme example where you don't see at least 3 or 4 from very strong to more challenged real estate markets. So all of you are confronting in your everyday work as district council members a variety of conditions within your council districts, and this will help you differentiate that as you sort of think about where your calls are coming from within your districts. I said that we did incorporate building permitting activity into the analysis. These data are oftentimes, you have to be very careful in the analysis of them, but you should know that building permits don't always translate into actual units constructed. But these are the official building permit numbers out of the city. These are consistent with what we observed when we looked at the census's version of these. And what you'll see is that over the last couple of years, between 18 and 22 inclusive, there were about 5,800 housing units constructed. The overwhelming majority, approximately 3,300 or 3,400 of which, were in those A and B markets. But you also saw significant construction, close to 2,000 units in those what I would call the middle market areas of Chattanooga, the Cs, the Ds, the Es. And so you see construction across the board, but you do see concentration in the stronger and the middle markets. That is not unusual if you sort of look across cities, particularly as the cost of construction has gone up and the cost of land has gone up. There is a tendency to focus in the expensive areas where that return can be observed in the sale prices of the properties. This is your MVA map, but each one of those little dots represents a cited assisted housing development. So in other words, not a housing choice voucher where people can sort of pick up and move whenever it is that their tenancy changes, but these are places that will remain affordable for some specified period of time. Important to note a few things about this. You have several of these cited assisted housing units in some really strong real estate markets. That's important because public policy at the national level and at most local levels has been really focused on the idea of making sure that people who are of modest means have access to the benefits that accrue to some stronger neighborhoods. A little safer, perhaps, a little better schools, perhaps, a variety of other things that you observe. You do have assisted housing in those areas. Now, you also have a lot of assisted housing concentrated in some of the more sort of middle and challenged markets. But what I would submit to you is some of the areas, as we see in a later slide, are not only strong or modest, but they're under a lot of pressure to change economically. The fact that you have this cited public housing there or assisted housing there is really important because it gives you a node to hold on to so that these assisted units can remain in places as those places experience market uplift. Here, what I'd like to do is just to sort of whet your appetite. As Nicole said, you have a new plan, you have a new set of tools that are available to you. This is, let's call it a hypothetical. What we wanted to do is to express to you that the work going forward is to sort of think about all those things that you do, TIFs, pilots, LIHTC, down payment assistant. And for those things for which there is a geographic anchor, think about how it is that you want to sort of connect those activities to the conditions of the market and where you want to prioritize. I'll give you one very simple example just to hold in your minds as you think about working with this. We do this work in the city of Pittsburgh. The foundations, the city government, the community development organizations got together and created literally a point system that sort of used the MVA, the market analysis that we did from there, to prioritize where they wanted subsidy to go because it met one or another condition of what they were trying to achieve with their investment. So this is really just the beginning. Think about this as what's your homework over the next several months is how do we connect these things and how do we prioritize these things given the conditions of the market. I know I'm running long, so I'm going to go pretty quick through here. I don't want to sort of overstay my welcome. Firstly, the demographics. One of the things you will notice is certainly the A and B markets tend to be overwhelmingly home to people who are white, not Hispanic. The B markets, on the other hand, of the pair, do tend to show a little bit more racial integration. But you also see a fair amount of integration in those C and D markets, and even so in those E markets. That is not terribly uncommon as we go from city to city. These integrated middle market areas stand as the kind of living, breathing example that people can live together and thrive and have good neighborhood conditions and things can work. It's not that there isn't segregation in cities, but one of the things that we do find, and we find here, is that you're seeing a little bit more integration in those middle markets, which we think are a really, a positive thing to hold on to here. I'd like to run through a series of maps. The logic of this series of maps is you are going to see areas go from the MVA color to that gray. What that is indicating is when the level of affordability is out of range for people at different income levels. So this particular map says if you make over 2 times the typical family income, which is about $141,000. If you don't make more than that, the gray areas are out of reach for you, but every other place is available. So at $141,000, most of the city of Chattanooga is available to you. But now I'm going to sort of take those incomes down and you can see how much less of Chattanooga is available to you. So this is 200%, $141,000. This is $85,000 a year. So if you make $85,000 a year, roughly what's available to you is just that, which is not grayed out. And at 100%, which is the typical family in the city of Chattanooga making $70,645, what's left actually are some of the more stressed markets or some of the blue markets that are really geographically at a distance from where some of the job centers are, particularly for the city. And then at 80%, it closes down more. And at 50%, what's left is the most stressed of the markets. I like to think of this series as the geography of opportunity. So if you make a lot of money, your geography is expansive. If you don't make much money, your geography is very limited. And you all know these places way better than we do, notwithstanding all the days that we spend in the field. You know that those markets are not the most opportune markets. So if you sort of think about what your income gives you, it's pretty limited. Now, is this more limited than other cities? What I would tell you is when we did this in your sister city, Nashville, there was literally like one block group in the entire city that was available. So here there's a little bit more. but there's not a lot. Pittsburgh, perhaps many ways very similar to, I think, Chattanooga, with between the, the mountains and the rivers and the like, has a little bit more expansive. So you all are sort of closing up. And, in part, that's a function of those rising prices and the relatively flat incomes. But that geography of opportunity is constrained. And it's not even across the board. If you look at the city of Chattanooga through the eyes of a white family, white families tend to make more on average than black families in Chattanooga, as they do in other cities as well. Here, the typical white family earns $90,000. This is what you see if you want to sort of find your place in Chattanooga as a white family. If you want to find it as a black family, very much less. And that's because black families make much less on average. So the geography of opportunity and all that brings for you and for your family is way more constrained if you are a person of color. Lastly, the risk of economic displacement. Here what we're doing is we're pulling together the market analysis and the way that the communities have changed economically over the last couple of years. I want to simplify this map as much as possible. Focus your attention on those dark green areas, those teal areas. Those are places that are in the sort of the C, the D, the E, the F, the G range, but are under tremendous market pressure. Some would call it gentrification. I like to just call it economic pressure. Those are places that when you come back and look at them, if you don't do something today, 2 or 3 years from now, the nature of the population economically that will reside in those places is very different than it is now, because the prices have changed and are changing in a way that will not allow similar to people to move in. So if you think about one of those teal areas, if it was home to teachers and firefighters and the like now, unless their incomes go up way faster than they probably will, that will no longer be home to teachers and firefighters, et cetera. There's one little block group down in the southern edge of the city that has a brown and not a teal. That is a place where it's not like an economic pressure, but an economic vacuum. So that's one area in the city that is in that middle range that is in danger of suffering from disinvestment. And that is a place where you sort of think about going in and doing a set of things. I take that map as somebody who's sort of worked in, had the benefit of working in a number of different cities. I take that map in the MVA, I take that table that had all those activities, and I say, now I want to connect these. I want to connect a set of preservation activities to those teal areas. I want to create a set of activities in that brown area that's designed to stabilize. And then we have other things for the other parts. But that is my last slide. Oh, actually, excuse me. This shows you those cited public housing and assisted housing. And the benefit here is you do see some of those cited housing developments in those teal areas. But a word of caution, those cited housing developments, unless they're housing authority properties, and some are and some aren't, will have an expiration. And across the country, when the expiration hits, if that market has gotten way pricier, the owners of those properties feel it's better to sort of sell them and make, to cash in, as opposed to sort of keep them in that affordable pool of units. My words to you, for whatever they're worth, is to focus some attention on those cited properties in and around those teal areas, because if they have expirations, you're likely to lose them, and that won't be to the advantage of the community or the people that live within them. And that is my last slide. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, happy to take them, but I appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Ira. We do have questions. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Great presentation.
Thank you.
When I look at that map, it really, I'm excited about what it could become, but it also makes me sad. Because when I look at the areas that I represent, I can still see the redlining and the intentional systemic disinvestment in our communities. And when you look at it to see, it just really exposed a lot of stuff in that map. It's not just about housing that we still continue to ignore. And, we haven't quite got the niche as far as policy-wise, what we actually can do and implement to change the way the color look on the map. I live in that darker area, the Eastdale community, and every day when I check my mail, when I get home, I got a flyer that says we will purchase your home
Yes.
for whatever amount they sending, which probably could be at least about $10,000 more than what was paid for from the beginning, you know? And when you're looking at the other markets, where would I live if I was just in need and sold my home instantly? Where else could I go according to this map? Like, I'm bound to still continue to live in a distressed community based on my, my income level and just the areas of where that I could go. But it's my hope that this isn't just a presentation that we present in the city council today, that we will begin to implement the necessary policies and changes that need to happen so that we can see some different colors on the map and actually see a one Chattanooga frame where everybody is thriving.
And I appreciate that comment, and I would like to say to that very point that you raised, communities around the country are really feeling the pressure of people, private investors trying to get active in the single-family real estate market, in part because the prices, even though high, once you start factoring in that you can get $1,500, $1,800, $2,000 a month rent, as an investment, they work out quite well. And so communities around the country are doing things like creating the effective corollary, like to a do not call list. Like, you can't, bombard people to say you want to buy their property. The city of Philadelphia created one like that, where, people can get their name on a list and they stop getting bothered. The thing that you worry about is, on the one hand, the good notion is if you wanted to go and somebody was willing to give you a fair price, terrific. The world's your oyster. But if you didn't want to go and you didn't have full comprehension of the market, or the fact that if you go with $10,000 more than you came in with, where am I going to go with that? And you get taken advantage of in such a transaction, you don't want that to happen. And so there are all kinds of strategies that communities use to allow the market to function, but also to protect people from the nefarious actors.
Chairwoman Dotley.
All right, thank you so much again for the presentation, and I do echo the sentiments of Councilwoman Coonrod. And I had a question about the middle lagging markets, and that's where I live. So could you elaborate a little bit on what that is? I can understand the stable, middle market, stable, weak markets, but middle lagging markets, could you elaborate a little bit more on what that is and maybe one or two ways to make that better?
Yes. So the middle lagging essentially references the fact that they are in those categories of the MVA that run from, I think it's C through G. So they are, not the strongest markets. They're sort of in the middle markets, or the places that have some stressors in them. That second lagging, and we should probably get better labeling, but that second lagging means that it's sort of not keeping pace with what's happening across the city of Chattanooga. So it's in one of those middle or stressed categories, and it's starting to show some signs of relative disinvestment. So what do you do in places like that? In places like that, what you're looking for is to sort of, in a targeted way, direct the kinds of preservation dollars and preservation programs that sort of, keep the market from falling, that support homeowners as they as they begin to sort of find it difficult to maintain their homes, be it, things like basic systems of their properties, like the roof, the heating, the plumbing, the electric, et cetera. Or other kinds of things like that people might find economically challenging to do on their own, but the city could help with, or philanthropy could help with, or the county could help, whatever, that there are other options. So I would look to sort of preservation kinds of activities in those. I would also perhaps look at whether or not there are nodes of strength that can be propped up, like a strong civic association that can really start to enhance the well-being of the residents. Is there a library in the neighborhood that could be more of a community node? Is there a rec center that could be spruced up a little bit so that people sort of feel good about sending their children to it, et cetera? So you're looking at a set of activities that are all about sort of propping up and financially supporting that area.
Okay, all right, thank you so much, I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Council, do we have any other questions? Ira, it looks like the board is clear. I do appreciate this very much. One of the things I notice is that these teal areas would be examples, I think, of some of our remaining naturally occurring affordable housing, our NOAA properties. So we've seen other communities go from being naturally occurring affordable housing into some of our more stable markets, but these are places where we currently have workforce affordable housing that I see is in danger. As we move forward as a council, I do think that disaggregating our data will be helpful, and it might be something that you all could help us with. In the last 6 months or so, our area median income has gone up. But what we know from the presentation in May is that it's going up not because Chattanoogans have suddenly begun making more money or because Chattanoogans have suddenly gotten more education, but because of new people moving here who are now Chattanoogans. But nonetheless, if we don't disaggregate that data, I fear that we will be focused on we could lose focus on moving some of the very populations and providing opportunity for populations that have desperately needed it for so very long, which takes us back to Councilwoman Coonrod's recommendation of us looking at an equity framework for our policymaking. So, Council, we have a work session scheduled for the 3rd of October. That is going to be in lieu of our strategic planning, so it will start at 2 o'clock. The public is welcome to join us for that. We'll be in the conference room. And that's when we'll start looking at everything as a group, all 3 documents. And I could see us beginning to build out that matrix, really, of what tools work where, and how we will implement the policies and subsidies that we do have available to us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Looks like the board is quiet for now, but I'm sure that we will have many questions for Nicole moving forward. Thank you for your time
And if we can help you,
and
please
your
let
work.
us know. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to a close of the Affordable Housing Committee. I'm going to turn it over to Councilman Ledford for Planning and Zoning. This is your water. I almost-
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and the moment you've all been waiting for, Planning and Zoning Committee. If I can get a minute approval from our last meeting, minutes will stand without objection. Council, in your packet this afternoon, we have several cases to go over that had opposition at Planning Commission. So we will start with case number 2023-0116. And good afternoon, Ms. Rennick.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
This is in District 1. Yes, sir. Thank you. Councilman Henderson, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. I don't know if we need to go over it at this time. The applicant did send an email requesting a deferral, and I'm going to ask for a 1 month to our next regularly planned zoning committee. So I don't know that we need to go over that today. We can go over it, I think, at the next planning and zoning committee, and may have a little bit more information to go with it.
I did see that in the notes and had a question to ask how long the deferral was. So will we be looking for a motion from you this evening on that? Thank you very much. Karen, we are going to move on to case 2023-0127.
Okay.
This is also in District 1. Councilman Henderson, any notes before we start?
Yes, and I don't see Mr. Jones here. I thought he was going to be here, but Karen, did he not talk to you about doing away with the C2 and just rezoning all the R1 in that footprint to R3?
That's correct. That's on the screen. There is a revised request, and I
Okay.
told the applicant that I would bring it up here. The applicant originally had requested C2 as part of the rezoning, and I can get to the revised request, which is R3. So where the little kind of the red dot is, there's a C2, a church property, plans on using that, the church property. It's no longer used for that use, and then expanding it to the 2 zones. It's had quite a bit of input from the community, and along with that revised request is a series of conditions, maximum of 18 dwelling units on the property, no access to Centro Street, that's the property to the north, that street to the north, no vehicular access through the remaining R1 property at North Moss Avenue, an existing church building to remain. So this would need a alternate version if council wants to move forward with this on the agenda. The legal description for the R3 property in the ordinance is correct. It would just need to show the revised conditions and drop the commercial zoning.
Would you go back to that north border right there, where you're going from R1 to R3, would that require a landscape buffer there?
I believe it would require a street yard and not a landscape buffer, but I can confirm that, or since Dallas is here, I will look at him and see if he's got a thought.
Require some kind of.
Some sort of screening.
Okay. We talked about having a landscape buffer there. Alan said he thought it was required, but I guess what I want to do is make sure that there's going to be some kind of buffer, landscape buffer there.
Okay, and we
I don't
can,
know if that's through, condition or if that's a requirement. If it's a requirement, we don't need a condition.
okay, we'll check it and have a discussion before council tonight and either say this is the required condition, or if it's a required standard, or if it's a condition, maybe give a suggestion on a condition.
Okay, and I would like to see an alternate version this afternoon reflecting this zoning and those conditions.
Council, will you allow me to check with the city attorney on one quick thing, please? Are we permitted per TCA now to add an alternate version to since we are actually voting on this tonight, is that right? Versus we usually have a week in between to make this change, but we're within the window, we need to.
It is currently on the agenda for this evening. If that request is made this evening during the meeting, that can be done. Normally, you're supposed to have things 48 hours in advance of a meeting on the agenda for the public to be able to have an opportunity to comment.
Well, let me follow up on that. It doesn't prevent us from making an amendment
To it during the
to
meeting.
it. So if
because
I
it would
need to
be-
make an amendment to it as opposed to an alternate version, which I don't know what the difference is, but I can do that as well.
Yes, sir.
You're hitting on all cylinders, Councilman, there. That's exactly where I was heading, so thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Madam Vice Chair?
Thank you. Quick question. I've noticed in the conditions that there were 2 roads, no access to Centro Street and no access to North Moss. How are these people going to get out of their houses?
There's a C2 portion that's already existed.
So is that the pink?
The pink, that's correct.
So they'll all access,
Kelly's Ferry.
it'll only come in and out of Kelly's Ferry? Okay. All right, thank you.
There's only 18 units, so there's no requirement for 2 access.
Okay.
That concludes your questions, Madam Vice Chair? Yes. All right, thank you very much. Any other questions on this case? All right, we will move into case 2023-0114. This would be in your district, Madam Vice Chair.
This is at 217 Tremont Street, and this is a rezoning to the ERM3 Urban Edge Multi-Unit Residential District. That's obviously a form-based code district. A proposal is for multi-unit residential property with 15 units. Excuse me, let me get to my notes. This is currently R3. There is for form-based code across Tremont Street, starting at the church, which is kind of at that point at the ERA 2 and moving south. And that form-based code zoning was part of the original rezoning in 2016 when we did the citywide form-based code rezoning. There's a couple other pieces you'll see to the northeast. There's an ERM 3 and an ERA 2. Those have been rezoned since that original form-based, kind of the citywide form-based code. So the current R3 zone will allow 4 units on that site based on lot size and yield. In order to increase density, the applicant is requesting that form-based code, the ERM3, and proposing 15 units, which is 47 dwelling units an acre. Surrounding land uses include single-unit residential, there's vacant land, commercial, and then a church across the street. The site's located in the North Shore Plan from 2007, which recommends urban, medium, high density residential for the future land use. And that promotes urban densities at 12 units per grader. And then there's a section in the plan that specifically notes that urban infill residential form is intended to promote existing detached residential and promote urban infill residential densities of 12 units or greater. So that plan is really looking at increasing density. Staff noted that the form-based code zone allows development excess of 5 units, which aligns with plan goals. The plan also has some language about steep slopes, and I won't go into all the points, but just stressed that their steep slope protection is important to this community, and staff just recommended that development be considered of the topography on the site in order to ensure compatibility with adjacent development form and protect steep slopes in the area. So that's a note in the plan and carried over and stressed by staff, but that does not come up as a condition. The staff found that the request is compatible with adopted plans surrounding land uses and development form. The site is in close proximity to the form-based code boundary. There's some review to make sure that's appropriate for the extension of form-based code, and this was appropriate. Adjacent form-based zones to the form-based zones to the south and north of the site. And so staff recommended approval. There was quite a bit of opposition present, concerns about parking, both on-street parking and then parking on the site. Was there enough adequate parking on the site for the proposal? Concerns about pedestrian safety, landscaping, walls, retaining walls on the site, and just on-street management of the property in general. So Planning Commission found the request is compatible. Planning Commissioner spoke to the fact they thought that this was the type of development that we wanted to see at this location. And it was compatible with development form and adjacent land uses, and Planning Commission recommended approval.
Madam Vice Chair?
Thank you, Karen, so much. Would you please talk us through what is allowed to be built in ERM3? What uses are allowed in ERM3?
It is primarily kind of residential multi-unit, and I did not have the table. So commercial, so you primarily your attached multi-unit. And I can have a table to better answer that tonight.
So would this be adding a commercial use? Is this allowed for live work at all?
There would, besides, I think, the regular kind of home occupation allowable use, this is not a commercial zone.
Okay, and to confirm out loud, this is not a zone where a hotel would be allowed?
Hotels and motels are not a permitted use in this zone.
Thank you. So it's interesting that there was opposition present. I have gotten 0 emails about this, which I kind of expected to hear from it, and I've met with the developers well in advance of them putting in this application. Will you talk to me a little bit more about the opposition and the question of on-site management?
So that one we have is flagged. I think that they were, my memory is there was a lot of, and I put some pictures in case there was opposition. There's, it's showing how the parking is located, and I believe the applicant's narrative said that they are meeting the required minimum parking standards of form-based code and then taking advantage of the ability to reduce it based on some proximity factors. So they are planning on meeting the code requirements. I think there was just concern about people parking that might live here, that might have additional cars, and would they park on the street? Who would manage how that would happen to make certain they weren't parking on the street? I believe it was in relationship to parking. Where there's quite a bit of concern about parking on the street. There is a parking deck down the street, and the applicant did speak to that also could be a factor in additional parking if someone needed it.
And so these are, they're planning 15 total units. It looks like they've got plans for 11 parking spaces.
That's correct, and I believe their narrative spoke to the fact that the code requires essentially around one unit, and then they're able to draw down. The code allows, if you have certain items in closer proximity, you can reduce that number, and that they're mentioned that they're taking advantage of those to be able to draw down that number.
Yeah, they mentioned the bike parking as part of
Right.
that.
I think they have 8 bike parking spaces for the site.
What was the transportation department's feeling on this parking
I
allocation?
don't believe that we had any comments on that specifically, but a lot of times that will be handled during permitting, since they believe they mentioned at Planning Commission they plan on meeting code. I don't know that we got any additional comments.
Okay. And to be clear, people are allowed legally to park on the street unless there's a no parking sign, correct? In the
Yes,
city of
that was some of
Chattanooga?
the discussion,
Okay,
yes.
all right. Okay, thank you, that was really helpful. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Karen, I have a quick question for you, since you mentioned steep slopes. Will this engage our vegetation component?
Yes, and staff made a note that with the steep slopes that would come into play.
All right, that's excellent, thank you. All right, any other questions on 0114? All right, moving on to 2023-0121. Councilman Smith, we travel to District 3.
We're not going to go over anything with that.
I did not have there was opposition, but I'm happy to go
I did
over
not
that.
have,
Okay,
yeah. Would you like that case?
No, I'm good.
Are you sure? Yeah, I just have that noted as no opposition, so,
No worries, sir, I'm good.
all right, then we will continue with 0121.
Okay, I noted this case had opposition and emails, but it is one of 3 cases. There's a proposal to do a multi-unit apartment complex, so it requires the lifting of condition, which is case 121, a rezoning, which is the following case, which actually had probably more of the opposition, and then an abandonment of right-of-way. That was recommended for approval yesterday at Planning Commission, so that won't appear on your agenda, but I wanted you to know there's several cases that are related to the one overall development. So the, go back one, this is on Hickson Pike. It's about a mile east of Northgate Mall. A rezoning is to lift the conditions on a C2 zone. And it's part of this overall larger 132-unit residential apartment development. And just kind of showing that overall site plan, because we'll be talking about a small part of a 0.67 acre piece, kind of in the middle on the eastern side of the development. So it's an existing C2 property. This is the site of a former nursery that fronts on Hickson Pike, and when it was rezoned in 1989, it had a series of zoning conditions, limiting use, access, and those are the ones the applicant would like to lift. So again, it's related to just kind of this one part in the center of the overall development. The site is in the Hickson North River Plan, which recommends a medium business mix, which really is kind of a mix of kind of a standard commercial mix. Staff felt it was appropriate to lift conditions 2 through 4, which are the access easement conditions, but is recommending, instead of just lifting all use conditions on the property, recommended that drive-through, warehousing and wholesaling, auto-oriented uses, hospitals, and adult-oriented establishments shall be prohibited. So not fully lifting that commercial condition, but limiting out the uses that generally are not compatible with, sometimes with neighboring properties. So there probably was no opposition present to this. Planning Commission kind of heard them all at the same time, so I just wanted to bring it up. And it comes with a Planning Commission recommendation similar to the staff recommendation, which is amend condition number 1 and lift conditions 2, 3, and 4. And I can move on to the next one, which is the companion case. This is the rezoning case for the property. And the request is to rezone from R2 to R3 for 17 acres. So this is kind of the bulk of the property. The area in purple is the one that's lifting conditions. So a portion of this apartment development will occur in that commercial zone. So this is intended to rezone the R2 piece to be part of that, the rest of the development. The site's surrounded by single-unit residential, commercial, and office uses. Staff found that the request is not compatible with the Hickson North River Plan surrounding development or development form. Staff felt that the existing R2 zone meets the plan goals for low-density and medium-density residential, and the R2 zone would allow 44 single-unit lots, 34 duplex lots, or 68 two-unit townhome lots, which align with the plan goals, and felt the existing zoning is more compatible. Staff did highlight, though, just a couple components of the plan that were supported. So the overall site plan and the proposal, there were several items that did conform to the plan. One of those is community space along North Chick Creek. That is something the site plan shows, and staff just want to acknowledge that that is supported in the plan. And there's no proposed access to Old Hickson Pike in the development, and that's something that continues a zoning condition pattern that council's put on cases over time. So the applicant came to Planning Commission with some proposed, conditions, and then Planning Commission added on one or two, and it comes with a recommendation to approve rezoning with the following conditions. There's 6 noted there. The applicant told me just prior to this meeting that he's going to request to lift the maximum density of 132 units in the driveway location to be off of Old Hickson Pike, so he can speak to those at the meeting. And the staff recommendation had been to have no access off Old Hickson Pike, so that does conform to staff recommendation and prior zoning pattern.
Councilman Smith, see your light.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Karen, thank you. Honestly, I think this recap really answered most of my questions. My big concern that I had spoken to the applicant was, well, a couple of them. One being access from Old Hickson Pike, which we're in agreement of removing that. And the other part, of course, was no development north of Old Hickson Pike. So the area that immediately abuts the creek will be left either as is or made more usable as green space.
Correct.
So no development in that area. I think you also said the applicant may want to lift the maximum density of 132 units?
That's correct. I believe they might be acquiring additional property. I'll let him speak to that. I don't have the numbers or the exact what he's thinking at this point. Okay.
I can deal with that one this evening, but I'm not amenable to that request at this time. Mr. Chair, I have no further questions. I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm not sensing a deferral request this evening then?
We shall see.
Okay, understood. Thank you, Karen. So we covered 0122, 0121, moving into 0085, over to Madam Chair's District 7.
And I had flagged this just because it had originally had opposition. I believe we presented on it at the July Planning and Zoning Committee, and I believe there's some additional discussion being held with the community, so I won't present on it unless specifically needed.
Madam Chair, you have the floor.
Yes, so the community is still working with the developers to work out some traffic plans. I would like a deferral for this one until October the 10th.
October the 10th.
Yeah, October the 10th.
Okay, that is noted. Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, someone from council will need to take that for you. All right.
Thank you. That's
Yes,
it.
ma'am. Thank you. Any other questions on comments? Okay, thank you very much. Karen, moving into 0137, please. We will go to districts 8 and 9.
Okay. And 137 and 138 are for the same, at the same location, the Lucy Quarter site. This is going to be a little bit unusual. Let me get to it. Staff is staff is requesting a deferral. There are 3 related cases. One is an abandonment of a right-of-way, and then the 2 cases before you on the agenda today are lifting conditions for mandatory referral abandonment. So there's a package of 3 here. The first, and staff had recommended denial of the abandonment, had recommended to Planning Commission denial of the abandonment, and then was recommending deferral of 137 or 138 to see what happens with that abandonment request because they're connected. 137, 138, the applicant is requesting lifting the condition requiring dedication of right-of-way. So we were kind of seeing what CDOT recommends to council and how council acts on that right-of-way prior to lifting conditions. I don't know if we weren't able to perhaps to convey that timing to Planning Commission. They did move them forward. So we spoke internally as planning staff, reached out to Ben Taylor, had another discussion. We are requesting deferring, again, lifting conditions. That abandonment is under review by CDOT right now and will be put on council's agenda in a few weeks. So we are asking, we don't have quite the good guidance that we need to give you until we're able to get that thorough review of CDOT for that right-of-way. So we are requesting, we as staff are
Karen,
requesting
how
that.
long?
Pardon?
How long?
I will defer to Ben. 3 weeks.
We want to make it forward to our next Planning and Zoning Committee. Is that all right? All right. Okay, very good. 0138. Did you cover all of that, Karen?
Yes, 138 is the same, just we have this little kind of set of related ones, and 138 is the same. We need the same information.
So is the deferral related to 0138 or just 0137?
Both 137 and
Both.
138, we would like to request deferral for the 1 month just discussed, so we can act on 136, or have their permission from 136.
Okay. Very good, council. Hope we're making good notes.
Yep.
Very good. All right, moving into 2023-0117, we'll now move to District 4, not a zoning request, but a PUD request.
That's correct, and this was, and then, Mr. Chair, if I can reserve the right to swing back to the special permit for the liquor store, I'd just flag that for some clarity, but I will.
That is totally fine.
Okay, I'll move on to the, okay, case 117 is in East Brainerd on Gray Road at 1619 Gray Road. And this is under the resolutions because it's a special permit for a residential plan unit development. The applicant originally was proposing 31 single-family detached lots. And that has changed after going through discussions with the community and Planning Commission. There was opposition at Planning Commission, so that's why we're covering it. The property is zoned R1, as is much of the property on Gray Road. That yellow is the R1 zone. You're picking up some pieces off Jenkins of a townhouse development. Jenkins has a little bit of a different feel and has introduced some attached housing, has introduced some more close, higher density housing, but we don't have that on Gray Road yet. There's no recent zoning history in the site, and just based on our calculations, the R1 zone by right could yield a gross lot yield of 38 dwelling units. That might be a little bit high. It might be a little bit closer to the somewhere in the lower 30s, but that's not based on infrastructure and permitting requirements. That's just kind of a number by staff. The surrounding development form is primarily single-unit residential development on large lots ranging from about 2 acres to there's some large multiple acres up to 9-acre lots. There's a floodplain in the area, 100 and 500-year floodplain, and that does come up in some of the discussion, so I wanted to show it. It's near the back of the lot. There's a little area that's outside the floodplain, and you'll start to see how the site plan addresses that floodplain area. The site's located in the Area 11 East Brainerd Plan. It identifies the site as suburban residential, which includes single-family detached as the primary use. Again, the property is zoned R1. The PUD is for single-family detached use. Density in the suburban residential place type can range from 3 to 10 units per acre. Because this is zoned R1, the underlying zoning will control the density. The Area 11 plan notes that area residents expressed a high level of concern about flooding, and the plan provides some specific recommendations that could possibly be considered. I just noted that generally, it talks about preserving land for natural stormwater management and wildlife habitat and clustering homes on smaller lots to minimize overall impacts. Staff found the proposed single-unit detached development is compatible with the plan and recommended a condition to limit development in the floodplain to ensure compatibility with plan goals. So staff recommendation was to approve the planned unit development with no residential lots allowed west of the 100-year floodplain, and that being kind of west closer to that neighborhood. There was quite a bit of opposition present. At Planning Commission, concerns about water runoff and stormwater. The Gray Road is used for cut-through, just general traffic in the area, concerns about overcrowding, the condition of the roads, and then flooding. Planning Commission found the request is compatible with the plan and adjacent land uses. The applicant came with some conditions, and with conditions, Planning Commission felt the PUD was appropriate. So there's a list of conditions there. And I can read those out. I think kind of some of the highlights would be that there's no accessory dwelling units. That's, I think, in response to keeping the density down for the neighbors. Evergreen tree spacing, and then a minimum building lot width of 55 feet. That was something that was in response to some of the neighbors' concerns. So this does come with a recommendation to approve the PUD with conditions.
Okay, and this is in District 4. So this started to bring council up to speed with a 3-hour meeting, which I appreciate everyone who came out, a great number of folks who live on Gray Road. I think it's about 25 residents, and I enjoyed spending time with them and hearing their concerns. And the adjacent property owner in your packet this afternoon is additional conditions that the adjacent property owner is, I guess, so asking for. But I think it's important to note too that these aren't conditions that were agreed upon. They did have a meeting, they being the applicant and the representative from the neighborhood who is the adjacent property owner and homeowner. And I appreciate them having that meeting. They did meet, but they were unable to, I guess, come to a full agreement. Therefore, we are here, and it will be up to this body to make that decision this evening. And I wanted to make note of that. Karen, those additional conditions were to replace the no development west of the floodplain. The other condition was a aluminum fence and trees, both, to be built on the property of the developer along the entire northern and the entire southern boundaries. Those were the conditions that the adjacent property owner is asking for. And so be on the lookout for that. Obviously, we don't do an alternate version per TCA recent rules. So you could see that coming in the form of a motion from the floor. The interesting part about this case is under R1 and with our recent ADU, and I think I heard some gasps back here from the council, seeing that as a condition. If you were to take, and I think the numbers, once you take out the floodplain, you look at 25, I think is a number that is by right, that does not need council approval, does not need neighborhood approval, just needs a permitting process. And then the ADUs are automatically in there. So I want to make note that that is a number that is equal to 50 residential units if it were. And but the crux of the argument was that Gray Road is not in condition for this, and I would agree that it is a narrow road, like many of our roads in the city of Chattanooga. and it is too fast. And therefore, out of that meeting, I immediately started, because I heard conversations from the residents that Gray Road was too fast. So thanks to Ben Taylor, who is taking that under task right now, we're going to lower that speed limit, right, Ben? All right, to 25, which is a residential. And then I think the next step is they had tried once before to petition for speed humps and speed reduction. And I think that is by petition, Ben, if I'm correct? Okay, so that process will involve the neighbors once again, so I want them to pay attention to that. But those, if I covered kind of the nuts and bolts here, that's what we have. So the PUD does limit the number of houses to, I believe it's 27. So the difference
27, I
is
was
2.
remiss in mentioning that, yes.
And you remove the ADUs, so you remove that entire component. Now, it is important to also notice in the proposed housing action plan proposed to us last week before, the ADUs will be heavily promoted in the city as a way to increase density. And that's a note that I wanted to make sure everybody understood. So anyway, that's really all I have at this point. And I do see Council, Madam Vice Chair, your light. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. Yeah, I will say the ADU condition did strike me as a limitation to property rights of the people who would purchase homes in this area. How large are they anticipating these houses being? Do you know?
From what I remember, these are single-family homes. I will tell you what I heard in the meeting and in conversation. These are single-family homes ranging from $600,000 to $1 million homes. So I would imagine these are I'm going from the meeting.
Yeah.
25 to 3,500 square foot homes.
So if we were to pass a condition that they couldn't have ADUs, then they couldn't put a mother-in-law suite above a 3-car garage.
Correct. Under the conditions that we
Under
have.
the conditions.
Now, as it stands now, yes, they can.
Okay.
Yes. Or rent it out.
Right, or rent it out, or have they couldn't alter their property to have a kitchen and a bathroom as part of their home officially.
Go ahead, Karen.
I was
you can
going to say,
answer that
with
from-
the ADU, I would think that would pull the conditions for that rezoning and note that was not allowed.
Okay,
Yeah, so.
okay. Is the house adjacent allowed to do that?
The house adjacent
On either the north or south border?
has a right to an ADU
Yes.
by
They do.
right, yes.
Okay.
R1
Just as the
zone.
property is
See, and
now,
they're
they have a
single-family
right.
detached R1.
That is correct.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All
That's
right, any other questions on this case? I'm not seeing any. Council, are there any other cases that we did not cover?
Can I touch briefly on the liquor store, just because there's a note?
Do you have to?
The city attorney's nodding, so I feel like that might be
Okay.
appropriate. We had a staff note in your packet regarding the liquor store that the GIS records show that was about 514 feet from the nearest boundary of a church, and that we needed to get a survey. We did get a survey from the applicant end of last week, first of this week, and it shows the property is about 515 feet. So that is added to the site. That's been added to the resolution. And then the city attorney's office recommended some language that is added as part of the alternate version under the resolution. And it's a condition just noting about leasing in the future, applying for a new liquor license, showing the distance. Just because we do have a church in close proximity, we're just making sure we do our due diligence, watching the proximity.
And there is a requirement in the code currently, if it is owned by the property owner and it's 500 feet, it's okay. But if it is leased, it has to meet the distance requirements. So that's what we're trying to make sure of.
Thank you. Yes, we just wanted to make sure that is the alternate version, which does have the recommended language in the ordinance and the survey attached.
All right, I know Councilman Henderson is fully engaged in that liquor permit, so. Councilwoman Knoll, I see your light. I apologize, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, I mean, you are finished with all the notable oppositions, am I correct on
Yes,
this?
ma'am. If there's any
Okay.
case you'd like to go over, please let me know.
I do, I have 3 here.
Yes, ma'am.
2 of them, I have not heard from the developers at all.
Could you give me a case number if you don't mind,
Yes.
please?
2023-0112
112, yep.
and 2023-0118.
So item J, item K,
Yes.
thank you.
So I don't know if they're here now. I guess not.
Yes, but we
Okay.
normally,
Right.
we're in committees.
I just wanted to know if
But
they
they
were
are here,
here.
if you'd like to talk to
Okay.
them in just a few minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so, and then on 2023-0126, I will be asking for a deferment on that due to language barriers, so.
Will you require,
Want to.
how long, a week?
A week.
1 week?
Yes, it would be
Okay.
September the 19th.
All right, it's going to be a deferral evening.
Okay,
Okay,
thank
Very
you,
good. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
you're welcome, thank you. Councilwoman Knoll, any other questions or comments for Karen? Karen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have no other business before this council. We do need to have an attorney-client in our conference room. So we are adjourned until